And thank you so much for, taking time out of your morning to have a chat. It's very much appreciated. Um, I am a big fan of your work, so this is I feel very privileged to get a few moments of time. So thank you. Um, you see, we are here to discuss Scared to Death, which is going to be getting its international premiere in Glasgow at FrightFest. And I spoke to Paul a little while ago, and I think he mentioned that you became involved quite early on. What was it about this idea that sort of made you want to get involved and dedicate so much time to it?
Well, originally, it's really is kind of interesting. I forget because I don't always approach something like I'm going to be part, how much I participate in the actual production end of it or whatever. But originally, he asked me to play the psychic, and Elise is my only psychic. I'll never play another psychic in a movie. Um, Insidious is still in motion. I mean, it's not a dead issue at all, and so I liked Paul. I met him during the pandemic when I can't remember the name of the podcast. It was like uh it was a video project basically about interviewing us. Our father our father was dying of COVID. So it was like a sort of a live action um uh interview. We were all kind of fighting the family fighting. It was a very interesting project that he had done. So I like Paul a lot, and I was very interested in him and Eric. So when they asked me to play the psychic, I said, "Why don't you let Bill Moseley play the psychic, and uh, let let me play the boss. Let me be the head of the studio," which is a little different too. And they liked the idea, so we kind of went through it and the material, and they were very open to my suggestions, which is of course very exciting because it's sometimes you've got an answer and people just don't want to know about it, and that's very frustrating for me, especially because I often feel I'm right. I mean, not always, but often my instincts are pretty good. And I think it was a more interesting road to take for both of us, both for Bill and for me. He it was his idea sort of, I think, to make him kind of a charlatan, that he wasn't, and me too. I thought he's like a carny guy. He's kind of where's the money, and yeah, I'll pretend I'm going to have a seance for you. So we kind of filled that part of the storyline in a little bit. And made Max, don't call me Maxine. She wanted to grow some balls, or I think maybe she had them already. But I wanted to make sure she was also vulnerable. I think it's very boring when you have characters who only fill one dimension of the story. And so that was something I also participated in with both guys, with Paul and with Eric, because I said, you've got to see another side to her. And that maybe she's not such a hard ass, and that would make her more likable also, because you sort of hate her and love her at the same time. She's got a big mouth, which I love being able to play somebody with a big mouth. And so it sort of came together, and they were happy with, what we came up with, and so was I. So um, there we have it, is how it evolved.
Now, like you say, Max is this sort of like egotistical, overbearing character. And I think typically, this is a role that would have been played by a man. How much fun did you have, sort of portraying this character archetype and taking on this different direction and giving it that feminine energy? Because I think, we can be, just as, uptight, overbearing, and egotistical as the men.
Of course. I really like that. That was really my, the fact that I didn't want to play a psychic sort of pushed me over into that area, and I thought that would be a lot of fun to do, also to play this sort of, shut up, a really kind of a nasty woman who's, but who really does have an underbelly, and so, and that they were agreeable, that would be a good switcheroo basically. And Bill was happy with it as well. He thought it was a good idea, for him to play, this idea that he was a psychic, but then we all came up with the idea that he wasn't really a psychic. He was really kind of a jerk. But
And the film ventures into some almost Evil Dead areas. So it's got its horror scares, but then it's also got its sense of fun. How enjoyable is it? Obviously, like something like Insidious is very serious. It's very emotionally heavy. How much fun is it when you get to play in that horror comedy sandbox?
Oh, it's great. I mean, I love comedy. I mean, I really, um, I just love comedy. I mean, I always have. And it's interesting, even to me, that I sort of moved into this other world of horror. It's a, which I still don't quite understand. Honestly, it's sort of, how your life evolves and you go, well, how did I get here? And it's kind of like that. I mean, I've always done, I've been an actress as long as I can remember. I mean, when I was a little kid, that was what I did to entertain myself is in my bedroom. I would make up plays and with my stuffed animals and my dolls and make up stories and act them out in front of my mirror. It was like, so it was no surprise to me that I was able to become I kept that going. I kept that pretending going. I still do a little bit, and both in work and in play. But uh I think it was very surprising to me that suddenly the horror thing really picked up, and it really did. The first movie I did that had that aspect to it was Nightmare on Elm Street, which was where I played the teacher in the very first one. And I'm sure you know this too. My brother, Bob Shaye, he was a producer, and New Line Cinema was his company, and that was his film. And he basically, you know, he gave me the part. I got the part because I was the sister. And to this day, it's interesting that character, people still love that couple scenes we had. It's actually one scene. And so, and it wasn't a horror character, but the storyline, of course, of the film is, very much a horror film. And that sort of was the beginning. And people still, so I almost got put there. I mean, I didn't really search out doing horror at all. Um, I just like acting. I like pretending to be other people and figuring out what the scenario is in their life. And and now that I've gotten this sort of reputation, it's kind of almost bewildering a little bit some of the time. I love it. I love the fans. People are so nice to me. I mean, it's really much nicer than they're just the fans are wonderful. I mean, I've never really had a bad experience, and they love that character. They love Elise. They love her. And I was just trying to figure out what that is. And the closest I can come is that she's a giver. And she doesn't, and I don't think I never wanted to make her a goody goody, not that she's not really sweet, but she's a good listener. And she hears what's going on. I always think of her like a radio, sort of like a two-way radio. She's got that ear and mind where she picks up what's around her. And by the way, I think we all have that capability.
Mm. Yes,
So
definitely.
that's so
And obviously, I mean, people often say that comedy and horror kind of require the use of, similar muscles, just in slightly different ways. As somebody that, has, worked a lot in comedy and horror, would you agree that there is that kind of almost duality to the two of them?
yeah, I do. I think it's a mistake if you give up the levity in any genre. Um, I think humor and understanding material has two sides to it. It's like the good and the evil. It's like the comedy and the tragedy. And I honestly sometimes think that's part of why people like what I do, because I feel very tuned in to both those sides of myself. I mean, I can turn in a minute, and it catches me off guard some of the time. I laugh a lot. A lot of it is protective. Some of it is really humor. Some of it's just protection. Um, Not sure what I'm going to say next. It's an emotional laugh rather than a comic laugh. Um, but I feel both those elements of what's in front of you, both you see the good and the bad in everything. There's good and bad in everything. There's comedy and horror in everything. There's a duality, I think, in everything we do. And when you cut one out, I think you're cutting out part of your life in a way. So I'm very grateful to be able to have this opportunity. I'm not a comedian, but I'm funny because I see life with a lot of humor and also a lot of tragedy. So I like to think I'm both masks.
In Scared to Death, you have this character called, the Grog, who is he's meant to be this horror icon actor that's been, signed up for the project. Um, how did both you and Bill, who are, quite rightly, seen as icons of the genre, how did you work with Kurt? Did you give him any insider secrets about, well, this is maybe how I would do it, or, I've been in a room with so and so and this is how they were?
Not really. He was very humble and very deferring to us. I mean, I didn't, for me, it's just who's the character, who's the actor, working out the scene. I sort of stay not separate from the person, but it's about the characters that we're trying to create and the relationships. And Kurt was very he was very humble because he's a kind, he's got a big ego. He's that guy because he's a musician and he's got his own band and he sings and he's, a rock and roller and he's got his chains and his things. I mean, everything he wore in the movie, as he explained to us, was all his own stuff. I mean, that's the character he portrays in his band. But in terms of the work, he was very polite and very humble and very open to suggestions and asked for, his character and his person were both very different. I mean, his character was supposed to be very kind of arrogant, and his person is really very, very gentle and very humble. He's a very nice guy and a good listener, better than me. I don't always hear very well.
As somebody who who loved the Insidious franchise, I have to talk to you briefly about it. You mentioned obviously the fans loving Elise. There's been this whole franchise kind of built around that character. And you played her a number of times. But what does Elise mean to you?
It's a great question. Uh, Career is, is part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, who knew? I mean, when we did the first Insidious, the only thing I really remember, I mean, because Lee Winnell and James, I met them both when we did a short called Doggy Heaven, which is still on YouTube. And Lee and I play this crazy character. And when they had the script, when James actually called me a few weeks later and said, Lee and I have this script, there's a character you might be, interested, would you look at it? So I said, sure. And I read it, and the first thing that popped out is how much she talked. That she had pages of talking about some place called The Further, which I had no idea what anything that was about, because she sets up the universe of the story, which is a big responsibility for a character. Um, I like littler responsibilities usually. I don't want to, so this was a challenge, when I read it and I thought, sure, let's do it. So I don't think we had any idea the gravity that Elise was going to have. And I keep, again, I think that she is sort of this guileless character. And when we shot it, I mean, it was especially that first scene where I set up the whole universe of The Further, with the demons and what's happening there. And it was all this crazy stuff that Lee Winnell came up with. And somehow I guess I brought both fear and humanity, the real part of myself, which is I'm always scared. I'm scared of everything. I mean, I can put on a brave face, but the world is a scary place out there. And I think Elise is very tuned in to both sides of herself. She can take charge, but she's very, and again, she's like a radio, she's like a receiver. So she's able to feel signals, not just from the further, but from people. She's a good listener. And I think that's the appeal of the character ultimately. She's not beautiful. She's old, whatever she is. She's got a dog, probably. Lee gave me a whole family. Lee Winnell, I thought she's alone because I always saw her as a loner, like
Mm.
no siblings, that she played in her room by herself like I used to and make up stories. And when you're a child, especially, and I believe this is true, you are a receiver. And it only is later when you get cluttered, when the society clutters you, your parents clutter you, school clutters you, you get so much static that that purity goes away. And I feel Elise has been able to tune back in to that purity. And I think that's the appeal.
Yeah. So moving back to Scared to Death, obviously the film is screening at Glasgow. Do you have any sort of messages for those that are going to see it? You know, why do you hope that they take a chance on this film?
Oh, I think it's a wonderful story. It's got both humor and horror in it. I think it takes uh, I think it takes you on a really interesting journey, and I especially the last third of the film is really scary. And that even caught me off guard because when you're doing it and I mean, I don't want to give away too much stuff, but there's a head is the only thing I will talk about that was actually one of a great set piece that was done by a very I guess a very established special effects house, and it is so creepy. I mean, so it's both funny, it's got humor in it, it's got horror in it, it's got a good story. All the actors, everybody, I got all their names, but you'll see them all. Everybody did, I think, a great job with the differentiation of their characters and the relationships. And I love my character, Max. She's kind of a bitch, but but she gets the job done. So and she gets her comeuppance. So I think there's great character studies, wonderful character studies, just fun, and a really good story. I think you'll love the film.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you too.